Shocking, Russia is running out of fuel and tanks, and Putin is really worried. Could it be true that Russia has fewer tanks than it needs? And is Putin truly frightened in the arena of major international politics? There are speculations that there is an unexpected shortage of these heavily armored trucks. What does it signify for Russia's strength? Is Putin having a problem, or is there something else going on? Keep watching as we explore the astounding tale of Russia's disappearing tanks and the issues it brings up. Despite the constantly changing terrain of global conflicts, one constant remains: Russia's ongoing struggle to maintain a sufficient number of tanks on hand. This struggle has lasted more than a year and a half since Russia invaded Ukraine. For many who are watching the battle, the idea of Russia running out of tanks has changed from being treated with cynicism and amusement to an unsettling reality. Even though these numbers may be slightly inflated, they nonetheless represent a significant portion of Russia's pre-war armor stockpile, which has far-reaching implications for both Russia and the rest of the world. As of August 2023, Russia has lost over 250,000 soldiers, in addition to roughly 4,300 tanks and 8,400 armored combat vehicles. In the early days of the invasion, the vast majority of the tanks that were destroyed were either upgraded or built in the Russian Federation, and only a small percentage were models from the era of the Soviet Union, according to research by Ragnar Gutmanson, a researcher from Norway. However, by June of 2023, the situation had completely changed, and the Soviet era was no longer in use. The deployment of decades-old Soviet tanks from storage, including the T-54 and T-55, shows that Russian tank losses have reached such a level that the country is forced to do so. These tanks are over 75 years old and are therefore useless in scenarios involving modern combat. The T-55 was once a powerful tank when it first appeared on the battlefield. It was put into service soon after World War II and later became one of the most widely produced tanks in history, with an estimated 100,000 units produced over the ensuing decades. On the other hand, the design and capabilities of the T-55 are now thought of as out of date compared to modern tank systems. They are inferior to other contemporary tanks, such as the German Leopard 2 or the American M1 Abrams, in terms of weaponry, armor, and overall combat effectiveness. This discrepancy is particularly noticeable in the T-55's performance. The ammo storage mechanism of vintage Soviet tanks like the T-55 is known as the jack-in-the-box problem, and it is one of these tanks' most obvious weaknesses. While modern tanks shield their ammunition behind thick walls of armor to keep it safe, a well-placed shot to the tank's thin roof armor can ignite the ammo and cause the tank to explode with catastrophic results. Older Soviet tanks kept their ammunition in an automatic loader in the shape of a carousel that was immediately below the main turret and the crew. The significance of the Ukraine is based on a comment made by Professor Robert E. Hamilton of the United States Army War College for a Russian crew. If the ammo storage compartment is hit, everyone is dead. The most crucial point is why Ukraine should be blamed for forcing Russia to use these outdated death trap tanks, which have been in use for a very long period. Russia faces difficulties as a result of poor military doctrine and a failure to learn from past military missteps, which has led to Ukraine's resistance being far more successful than expected. Tank units performed poorly during Russia's initial push into Ukraine in 2022, which was characterized by strategic and tactical errors, as well as an ineffective approach to modern urban and semi-urban combat. Tanks are crucial in today's battle because of their ability to maintain and control territory, pin down enemies, and remove obstacles. But to be effective in combat, tanks need the appropriate support. Russia's tank performance in Ukraine was bad as a direct result of their ongoing inability to grasp this crucial idea. Because they were unaware of history lessons, the defenders of Ukraine were able to take advantage of this weakness and achieve remarkable victories. Russia's inability to successfully employ its tanks in combat during the First Chechen War, which lasted from 1994 to 1996, has a long and painful history. To overwhelm the Chechen troops, who were smaller and less well-equipped, Russia used its large stockpile of Soviet tanks. However, despite having better numbers and equipment, these efforts were unsuccessful due to poor execution. Because the Chechen rebels lacked their tanks, They relied on rocket-propelled grenades, tank mines, and improvised explosive devices, IEDs. They also exploited flaws in Russian military doctrine, such as the reliance on tanks to lead ground assaults and infantry fighting vehicles to provide close support to gain an advantage in battle, though the use of infantry support was poorly coordinated. Due to problems with logistics, inadequate training, a lack of supplies, and deteriorating equipment, it became clear that the organizational structures of the Russian military did not function well when different troops were required to work together during the Chechnya War, which took place between 1994 and 1996. Surprisingly, these underlying issues remained unresolved for a considerable period. When the Russians invaded Ukraine, the conflict provided a larger and more determined opponent, emphasizing the weaknesses of Russia's military doctrine even more. Ukrainian forces successfully conducted ambushes by luring Russian tanks into urban areas where they were much more likely to be caught off guard. In the early years of the 21st century, Russia continued to rely mostly on tanks without adequate infantry support, relying on numerical superiority and firepower to defeat opponents with a lower total strength. A significant portion of the funds allocated for the military under Putin's kleptocratic administration went straight into the pockets of the nation's most powerful billionaires as a result of adopting this strategy. Regrettably, concerns such as training materials, equipment, and planning were not addressed at any point during the process. The invasion of Ukraine, a disaster that seemed unavoidable given the size and tactical flexibility of the country, caught Russia off guard. The Ukrainian strategy, which was quite similar to that employed by Chechen insurgents, involved luring Russian forces into urban areas where their tanks would be more exposed to danger. This plan involved building defensive rings around key locations to limit damage to infrastructure. Due to the lack of infantry assistance provided by Russian tanks, Ukrainian forces were able to successfully ambush the tanks and target their roof armor. This was made possible by the use of modern anti-tank weapons. By purchasing advanced anti-tank guided missile systems, like the Western-made Javelin Next Generation, light anti-tank weapon, and Ukrainian-made Studna, Ukrainian forces have significantly increased their capabilities. At level 4, these anti-tank guided missiles have been crucial in the fight against Russian armor. They were effectively used by Ukrainian soldiers to attack Russian tanks from cover, often hiding in buildings or bushes. By employing this tactic, they were able to fire their weapons and then flee without worrying about being shot back by the tank's armor. In addition, the use of ATGMs allowed Ukrainian forces to attack the lightly armored top parts of Russian tanks, which the Russian infantry fighting in them were able to attack. Even though Russia's initial offensive was littered with strategic and tactical errors, Arsenal's involvement in the conflict in Ukraine serves as evidence of the inefficiency of Russian military doctrine and the nation's inability to adapt to the demands of modern conflict. The nation's reliance on outdated tanks and its refusal to offer enough infantry support made the situation more challenging. The resolute opposition put up by Ukraine, along with a well-thought-out strategy and state-of-the-art anti-tank weapons, has exposed Russia's inherent weaknesses. So was Putin himself. The Russian leader expected such a quick victory that he may have had his officers pack their dress uniforms with their invasion gear for a victory parade in Kiev. Putin's overconfidence was one of the reasons that he and Jen Milley and I were wrong about the prospect of a quick Russian victory. I've fought in tanks in 2 wars. There is no spare room for dress uniforms. Any incredibly limited surplus space should have been filled with rations and bullets. Preparing for a short war also meant that some Russian forces may have run out of gas on the road to Kyiv. Other planning failures included not destroying Ukrainian air defenses early in the invasion, resulting in catastrophe for the Russian Air Force and for airborne troops tasked with seizing the Kyiv airport as part of a quick coup in Maine. The Russian military did not plan for a prolonged fight. So this is the end of our today's video. Do you like it? Kindly give your valuable response in our comment section below. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interesting and informative videos.